Imagine for a moment that you receive a deposit of 24 hours, right now, every day, without fail. But there's one condition. You're required to spend it all. Not a single second can be saved. That deposit is time. And the most curious part is that, although it's the most valuable currency we possess, we often only realize its worth after we've unconsciously spent a large portion of it. Seneca's phrase, "When you understand the importance of time, life gains value," carries within it a truth that is simple yet transformative. After all, what is life, if not time being lived? When we ask what life is, most people think of experiences, achievements, emotions, and memories, but none of that exists outside of time. Everything we live, feel, or remember is tied to the moment in which it happened. Time isn't just a resource we use to live. It is the very substance of life. Remove time, and nothing remains. No plan makes sense, no relationship exists, no emotion is possible. That's why wasting time isn't just inefficient. It's a silent way of wasting our very existence. Even though we rationally know life is limited, we behave as if it's endless. That's because the human brain tends to assume continuity by default. Studies in cognitive psychology show we have an unconscious tendency to imagine the future as something distant and always available. This leads us to neglect the present. We postpone decisions, delay important conversations, ignore small daily joys, as if there will always be a later. This behavior creates a false sense of security that steals our sense of urgency. And it's that urgency, not as haste, but as full attention, that gives weight and depth to the time we have. Many people fall into a repeating pattern, living in wait for the right moment, waiting for vacation, waiting for the weekend, waiting to be ready. But that right moment rarely arrives. Stoic philosophy warns us about this trap. Living in a waiting mode is living only halfway. Time doesn't wait for our emotional readiness. It moves forward, indifferent. When we delay life, we're not saving time. We're simply refusing to live it. This illusion that the future will be more favorable weakens the importance of the present, where everything truly happens. Seneca said that many people spend life as if they were rehearsing to live. And the most tragic part is that by the time they realize this, it's often too late. Stoic thought teaches that wisdom begins when we acknowledge life's brevity and use that awareness as strength, not as suffering. It's not about rushing through life, but about living with intention, making each day count, even if it's a simple one, giving depth to what is ordinary, because the ordinary is life, and that's where time truly expresses itself. Modern psychology reinforces what ancient thinkers already knew. To live well is to live present. The concept of mindfulness, full attention, shows us that the quality of our time depends on the quality of our attention. When we're distracted, we don't just lose focus, we lose life. Our mind wanders between what has already happened and what might happen, and the now, our only real possession, gets pushed aside. The more we ignore the present, the weaker our sense of purpose becomes. That's why so many feel empty, even with full schedules. Being busy isn't the same as living well. There's a huge difference between letting time pass and feeling time pass. The first happens automatically. It's just the clock doing its job. The second demands awareness. Feeling time means recognizing the value of a conversation, the impact of a choice, the silence between two breaths. It's living with the awareness that each moment, no matter how simple, will never return. And when that awareness becomes a habit, life changes in tone. It becomes deeper, more meaningful, because it starts being built with intention, not just repetition. When you begin to see time as the very essence of life, your relationship with your days changes. They stop being just ticking hands on a clock and become fragments of eternity. And that leads to an inevitable question. Why do we waste something so precious? The answer begins to take shape when we understand what it truly means to lose time. Many people live as though they had an infinite life ahead of them. We make long-term plans, postpone important decisions, leave meaningful conversations for later. We act as if time were a renewable resource, as if tomorrow were guaranteed, as if death was something that only happens to others. This distorted perception doesn't come from malice, but from a psychological defense mechanism. Humans avoid thinking about their own mortality because it causes discomfort. However, ignoring that reality doesn't protect us. On the contrary, it leads us to waste what is most precious. We live in a culture that masks death. Medicine advances to prolong life. Technology promises eternal youth, and social media presents idealized versions of existence, free from suffering. As a result, death is pushed to the back of our awareness. We don't talk about it, we don't look at it, we don't consider it when making daily choices. But real life doesn't work that way. Death doesn't need to be constantly present to cause fear, but it must be acknowledged to give life meaning. When we understand that everything ends, including ourselves, we begin to value what is still within our reach. One of the clearest effects of this illusion of immortality is existential procrastination. This isn't just about putting off tasks. It's about postponing life itself, loving later, taking care of our health later, searching for meaning later. It happens because, deep down, we believe there will be time. But that belief feeds an endless waiting cycle. Psychology shows that we procrastinate less when we're aware of consequences. And nothing is more final than lost time. Each day not lived with presence is a blank page in the story of our own existence. The Stoics practiced a powerful exercise, memento mori, which means remember that you will die. It might sound grim, but in truth it's a way of awakening. When we're aware of life's finiteness, attachment to the superficial fades. Comparison loses power. Urgency gives way to intention. This thought is not a fixation on death, but a radical affirmation of life, because only those who understand they will die are capable of truly living. It's not about fearing the end, it's about living in a way that, when the end arrives, regret has no place. There's a silent trap in everyday life: repetition. When everything becomes routine, we start to believe life is under control. Wake up, work, go home, repeat. This pattern creates a sense of stability that numbs us, but the truth is that no day is guaranteed. This false sense of safety, if not broken by reflection, dulls our urgency. Life doesn't give warnings when it's about to end. And precisely because of that, we must wake up to the reality of time passing, even when everything seems to be in order. Understanding the illusion of immortality doesn't have to create fear. It can, in fact, create freedom. The freedom to know there's no time to postpone what matters. That living on autopilot isn't worth it. That any gesture could be the last, and therefore, it must be whole. When you see the now as all you truly have, you begin making decisions that align more deeply with your truth. You stop pleasing others out of duty, stop accumulating out of insecurity, stop delaying out of laziness. Finitude becomes a filter. Anything non-essential loses power. It's only when we face the end with clarity that we truly begin to value each beginning. But before we decide what to do with the time we have, we need to understand how often we're simply spending it, without really living. Time passes whether we notice it or not. With every second, life unfolds. The difference lies in how we use those moments, whether we truly live or merely let time slip by. Many confuse being busy with being present. They believe that constantly doing something means they're making the most of life. But being busy is not the same as being conscious. A full schedule can leave no room for a single meaningful moment. Living isn't about filling hours. It's about giving them meaning. Time that is spent never returns, but time that is lived becomes memory, growth, and experience. Much of the time we waste hides in the form of routine. We wake up, follow our schedules, handle obligations, commute for hours, answer messages, and end the day exhausted, often without knowing exactly why. This emptiness of daily life happens when we move through everything on autopilot. The mind is elsewhere, already racing toward the next task, and the present moment gets ignored. When this becomes a habit, life begins to feel like a blur of faded days, where everything is done by inertia, and nothing is truly lived. A well-lived day is not measured by how many tasks we complete, but by how much meaning we find in them. A quiet coffee with full attention can be worth more than a week of lifeless accomplishments. Living time with quality means being fully present in what we do, even in the smallest things. It's not about chasing extraordinary moments, but about giving depth to the ordinary, being with someone and truly listening, eating and actually tasting, working and connecting with the purpose behind it. Time becomes valuable when it's lived with presence, and presence doesn't require more time, only more intention. We live in an era that glorifies productivity. Being productive is equated with success, but this constant drive to achieve can turn life into a chain of tasks, stripping it of deeper meaning. Psychology shows that when everything becomes about duty and performance, joy fades. Activities aren't experienced, they're just executed. It's like running on a treadmill. It feels like progress, but we're going nowhere. This cycle drains time of its meaning and creates a kind of fatigue that can't be cured by rest, only by awareness. Time that is truly lived is time in which we are fully present. Psychology refers to this as the state of presence, and it's something we can nurture. When the mind stops wandering between past and future and anchors itself in the now, everything changes. Time ceases to be a blur and becomes a space for fulfillment. It's no longer something that slips away. It becomes something we inhabit. Even the simplest actions, walking, breathing, talking, can become real moments of life when done with awareness. It's not about changing everything, but about waking up inside the life we already have. At the end of life, people rarely regret the things they did with presence. What weighs heavily are the moments that could have been lived, but weren't. Words spoken without listening, time with children passed in disconnection, dreams postponed because of fear or distraction. Regret is born from the late realization that we had time, but didn't truly live it. That's why the true measure of time isn't on a clock. It's in the impact it leaves within us and in others. Understanding the difference between spending time and living it shifts the way we see everything. And this awareness leads to a deeper question. Why, even knowing this, do we remain so distracted? The answer may lie in how the mind scatters. And that's where we begin to uncover the true cost of distraction. We live in an era where distraction has become the mind's default state. Notifications, social media, multiple open tabs, fast content, constant stimuli. We're always connected, yet disconnected from ourselves. What's most concerning is that this mental scattering doesn't seem like an urgent problem. It creeps in quietly, draining the present moment, dulling the depth of our experiences, and creating a chronic sense of emptiness, even on full days. Distraction doesn't just consume our attention, it steals our life in small, silent doses. The mind has a natural tendency to flee the present. It replays the past through guilt, projects the future through anxiety, and rarely rests in the now. This behavior has ancient roots. It once helped us survive by anticipating danger, but today, that same skill becomes a source of mental noise. We spend much of the day thinking about things that aren't happening, while what is happening right in front of us goes unnoticed. This habit of mental absence creates a life full of gaps, moments that occurred, but were never truly lived. The human brain wasn't built to handle today's volume of information, and the effects are real. Neuroscience shows that information overload directly affects concentration, memory, and our sense of well-being. When we constantly jump from one thing to another, we deny the brain time to process, integrate, or rest. This mental fragmentation leads to fatigue, irritability, lower productivity, and most of all, a sense of disconnection. Over time, this fuels the feeling that life is speeding by. But the truth is, we're simply not present enough to perceive it clearly. Without realizing it, we've adopted a way of living in which distraction feels normal. We eat without awareness, drive on autopilot, listen without hearing, live with our bodies present, but our minds elsewhere. Unawareness shows up in the smallest habits, checking the phone impulsively, scrolling endlessly, filling every silence with noise. This isn't just a behavioral issue, it's a loss of depth. Life begins to feel shallow, rushed and confusing. The problem isn't how much we do, but how little we're actually present in what we do. Mindfulness isn't some mystical idea. It's a trainable skill, and perhaps the most essential one for modern life. Truly being where you are is an act of resistance in a world constantly pulling your focus away. Relearning how to pay attention, to really listen, to notice the everyday details might sound simple, but it can profoundly transform your experience of life. A present mind feels more, learns more, suffers less from anticipation, and makes better use of real time. What seems to slow down time is, in truth, just the effect of finally living it with awareness. To be conscious is to clearly see where your energy is going, and that clarity is freeing. It enables more aligned choices, prevents waste, sharpens focus, and brings meaning back to what you do. When we observe our distraction habits, we begin to realize that what often feels like a lack of time is actually a lack of directed attention. And when attention returns, life stops being a string of forgotten moments. It becomes a conscious construction. Each moment starts to matter because it's being lived fully. Realizing the cost of a distracted mind is the first step toward reclaiming depth in life. But to truly live with awareness, we must ask what actually makes time worthwhile. That answer begins with a fundamental question. What gives meaning to what we're doing right now? There is a vast difference between simply being alive and truly living. Many people move through life with their bodies present but their minds elsewhere, fulfilling obligations, repeating routines, putting out daily fires, without ever pausing to ask whether they are living in line with what really matters. The art of conscious living begins with that pause, with the willingness to look at one's own existence more closely and ask, what am I doing with my time? Why am I doing this? Does it make sense to me, or only keep me in motion? Conscious life demands choices. To choose authentically, we must step out of autopilot. Most people react to circumstances, to what others want, to society's expectations, to daily urgencies. Living consciously means interrupting that cycle of reactivity and acting with intention. It doesn't mean controlling everything. It means deciding how to respond to each situation with greater clarity and less impulsiveness. It is placing lucidity above impulse, priority above distraction, and aligning doing with being. Presence is the heart of consciousness. Being fully engaged in each action turns the simple into the significant. Eating slowly, talking while looking someone in the eye, walking while feeling the ground, working with real focus. These acts seem small but have a deep effect. Life stops feeling rushed or empty because time lived with presence becomes denser. It is remembered, felt, and valued. That is why certain moments, even brief ones, stay with us for years. They were lived intensely, without distraction, with truth. A conscious life is also one aligned with your own values. Knowing what truly matters to you and acting accordingly creates an inner sense of integrity. When there is a gap between what you do and what you believe, discomfort, dissatisfaction, and emotional fatigue arise. But when your actions mirror your principles, life gains direction. Living consciously is not fitting into external standards, but honoring what makes sense for your own existence. And that takes courage. To say no, to change course, to uphold unpopular choices. In a noisy world, silence is a powerful tool. It is in silence, both inner and outer, that consciousness strengthens. There, answers emerge, truth reveals itself, excess loses power. Spending even a few minutes daily in silence clears the overload of stimuli and brings you back to the essential. Thinking, breathing, observing without hurry. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of self. It is fertile ground for more conscious decisions and a life with clearer direction. Living consciously does not require an external revolution. Often, freedom is found in simplicity, reducing excess, eliminating distractions, stopping the urge to have everything at once, choosing what truly matters, and letting the rest pass. A conscious life is less about quantity and more about depth, less about impressing and more about living with authenticity, less about controlling everything and more about being awake in the now. This simplicity is not poverty of experience, but richness of meaning. When you truly grasp that time is finite and that it composes every second of your existence, you start to treat it with greater respect. You stop wasting it on what doesn't matter. You begin saying no to what distances you from yourself and yes to what draws you closer to your essence. As Seneca said, life is long enough for those who know how to use it well. Perhaps the real secret of happiness lies precisely in this, honoring the time we have and through it, discovering the true value of being alive.